Hi, I'm Hani Gluck, and you are listening to Growing Global. I am passionate about helping entrepreneurs grow and scale their business. I've been an entrepreneur for over 2 decades. I built my own businesses, sold a business, and continue to leverage the global economy. Growing Global is about educating, inspiring, and motivating entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs on how to take yourself and your business to the next level. On today's episode, I have the pleasure of speaking with Cal Fussman. Cal is a New York Times bestselling author and writer at large at Esquire magazine, most known for the What I Learned feature, where he interviews icons that shaped the last 50 years. Icons like Jeff Bezos, Al Pacino, George Clooney, Barbara Walters, Jack Welch, Mikhail Gorbachev, Serena Williams, Jimmy Carter, Leonardo DiCaprio, Robert De Niro, Tom Hanks, Woody Allen, Kobe Bryant, Richard Branson, Muhammad Ali, and countless others. He's also the host of the Big Question podcast. He was born in Brooklyn, New York. Cal spent 10 straight years traveling the world, swimming over 18-foot tiger sharks, rolling around with mountain gorillas in Rwanda, and searching for gold in the Amazon. He boxed against the then undefeated world champion, Julio Cesar Chavez. He won a James Beard Award and served as a sommelier on top of the World Trade Center. He now lives with his wife, who he met while on his quest to discover the world's most beautiful beach. His wife, his 3 children live in Los Angeles, where he spends every morning eating breakfast with Larry King. That sounds pretty awesome. Cal and I talk about his transition from being a journalist to an entrepreneur. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did enjoy this chat with Cal. Okay, so I am sitting here with Cal Fussman today. Cal, thank you so much for joining me. I met Cal last night, so I didn't know you at all before last night. We met and you talked about the art of storytelling and what it means to be a storyteller in business, in life. And I asked you at your Q&A, what is a good question to ask somebody when you want to establish a rapport? And you said, start with the heart, go for the head, and then try to get to the soul. I love that. It's so powerful. So I know that you're on this journey. You have interviewed some of the most famous people in the last 50 years. And from Muhammad Ali, Larry King's a good friend of yours, and we can go on about all the different people you've interviewed. But now you're transitioning from a writer to an entrepreneur. So tell us about that journey you're on.
It's been probably the most amazing thing I've ever done, because if you can imagine living, half your life one way, where you were thinking about, who do I want to meet? Where do I want to go? What do I want to write about? Okay, I would love to do a story about Muhammad Ali. And the editor of Esquire sent me to spend a week with Muhammad and his family, and I was able to do that. But I was always working through magazines, and I was on contract, so I had a regular salary coming in, and it was, in that way, it's safe because you're doing what you want to do, and you're being paid well for it. Whereas when you transition to an entrepreneur, it is more than the product that you're putting out. You have to figure out how to get that messaging out, how to make people aware of it, how to make people want to buy it. And this was completely unknown to me. Had no concept, because all this was done by other people. And so now I'm past halftime in life, and I've got to learn this at the same time when the vehicle that all this flows through is the internet, and like I don't even know how to call an Uber or a Lyft on the internet. So I had to completely transition myself into accepting the technology. And one of the great moments of this voyage is coming in here and bringing my podcast equipment and showing you how to set up this particular equipment. You're used to working on the computer with Zoom. And for me, just to be able to do that shows me like how far I came. And this delights me again and again and again when I can show people, those audio checks, it's not that hard. You can do it. And I think there's just a lesson to that for anybody who has been working a long way. You could be a truck driver and know that pretty soon all the trucks are going to be driving themselves. You better think of a new way going about this. And entrepreneurial thinking is a great way to go because you then are in charge of your future. You just got to figure it out.
Well, yes, exactly. As an entrepreneur, you're innovating constantly, you're pivoting all the time and embracing change because we know that the one thing that's constant is change. And so we have to just continue to go with it. And I think entrepreneurs are able to do that pretty quickly.
Did you have entrepreneurial tendencies when you were young?
I did, for sure.
Like, what was the first moment that you knew you were an entrepreneur?
I was a kid. I was sketching. I had a lot of ideas. I was an only child for many years. So I had a lot of self-thinking time. And I always knew I wanted to be a business owner. But at 18, I decided the business that I wanted to start. And I started at 23. And
so you took 5 years to figure out how you wanted to do the business.
Correct, yes.
Now, I've heard a lot of entrepreneurs say, okay, you jump off the cliff and you build your wings on the way down. But it sounds like you figured out how to build the wings before you took the leap.
In retrospect, I probably had no idea what I was doing, but I was figuring it out. I was very determined, extremely determined. I knew what I wanted to do, and I just persevered. I didn't go to college. I was winging it from a young age. And it's been great.
What was that like to say I'm not going to college?
It wasn't talked about. I grew up where you grew up in Brooklyn at a pretty Jewish Orthodox family, and that just was not something that anyone did. I had a lot of business owners in my family, so everyone was very successful as a business owner.
Okay, so you didn't grow up with this idea that you must go to college?
No.
Wow.
No, it was about business. It was all about entrepreneurship. And people were doing really well. And back in the day, people just figured it out. And so I just figured it out.
So you knew you had to figure it out. What was your idea?
I was working for a doctor, and I realized that if I can work for a bunch of doctors, I can do their billing, their medical billing, and I can make a lot of money because I could just make a percentage of whatever the doctors were earning. And
this was a benefit to them because they didn't have to pay their own, is it bookkeeper or what?
They didn't have to pay their biller to deal with the insurance companies and collecting money and getting paid.
Man, you're taking all the hassle out of their life.
Right. So there's a lot of trust in the relationship because if I didn't do my job properly, they couldn't pay their mortgage, right? So the trust factor was really high. They really had to trust me, and I had to figure out a way to convince these doctors and hospitals to trust me to do what I was doing. But that was my first business. I'm on to my next business now. But it was a tremendous learning experience.
What did you learn from that?
The trust,
And that's the same thing that I learned from interviewing. And it's probably the same thing that anybody in business has to learn. Because if people can't be made to trust who you are and your product, then they're not going to come back the second time.
So the most important thing is the know, like, and trust, right? People won't buy you until they know, like, and trust you. And you have to go through that process.
Oh, I never heard that before.
So
Know, like, and trust.
I have to know you first. If I don't know you exist, I can't get to the liking or the trusting. So social media is a great way to get people to know you, but they have to then continue that process of the relationship. It works in that stage.
So how does the like stage work in social media? Because I guess social media is enabling you to make the connection. And then what's the next step?
A face-to-face meeting usually is a great way. I mean, I think I'm pretty likable. I've been pretty likable over the years. I'm social. It's easy for me to make friends, easy for me to talk to people. So I didn't have an issue with the like part. And I find it fun. I find it fun to create relationships with people. I find it intriguing to figure out what people like what they like to talk about, what their interests are. I like to send gifts for my clients' kids' birthdays and just really get to know them and work on the relationship, because at the end of the day, they're working with you as a person. And so the relationship is so tight when you really focus on this person. I may be working with a very large company, but my relationship with the CEO or the COO, that's a very important relationship. So are the other relationships in the middle, right? With middle managers and stuff. Just constantly focusing on that relationship, nurturing it, building it. I think that's really the key to success.
You know, it's interesting because as a journalist, I never thought that way. I would get to, the magazine would set up the interview, so somebody else had the trust, and they were able to show my work, which generated trust. But then all I had to do was show up. And then I had to gain the trust in a very short amount of time during the interview. But I never had to go through this process. And it makes me scratch my head because there's a lot of time that goes into it. And at least when you're getting a paycheck, you're not accustomed to that time. You're accustomed to, hey, I'm working and I'm getting paid. When you're the entrepreneur and now you're actually asking people to help you and you're paying them, they're relying on you. So it was a big, big transition that I'm only now looking back at and saying, wow, like what did you just go through?
Well, I think that this transition for you is perfect because you're such a fantastic storyteller that for you it's easy. We met, I never met you before last night, and you agreed to meet with me and be on our podcast. And that's a continuation of just saying yes to things, because you just never know who you're going to meet, who maybe lead you in some great direction that you need to be headed in. So tell us about this, your passion for healthcare and working with hospitals. Let's talk about that.
Okay, so what happened is, the amazing thing about this is things happen in your life that you're unaware of at the time that are going to lead you somewhere. You do something and it just shows up like 30 years later. So I'll give you an example. I was writing for a magazine it just came out of college, and it was a great magazine. It was a startup magazine. It was called Inside Sports, and it was created to compete with the big magazine at the time, Sports Illustrated, and they brought in all the best writers, and here I was able to go in, and they embraced me in this office, and so I'm throwing back shots with Hunter S. Thompson at the bar at night and meeting all these great writers, and every day is an event, and I'm learning so much. And then this magazine goes out of business. It's a startup, and while it was a creative success, they never got the financial side. They could never figure out how to compete with Sports Illustrated. So I didn't know what I was going to do, and I thought I would take some time off and travel to figure things out. And this trip just started going and never stopped. I just started meeting people. They took me into their homes. They fed me. They passed me around to their friends. And I started to be passed around the world. And occasionally, I would come back home and see my family. Also, if the money got really low, I would come back and do a magazine story or two and like refuel. Because with back in that time, like $7,000 or $8,000, I could go a year because everyone was feeding me and putting me up. And along the way, I realized I was also went to some place like the middle of the Sahara Desert, and I realized, if something happens to me, I don't have any medical training whatsoever. And so when I came back to the United States at one point, I thought, there's these courses that you can take and you can become an emergency medical technician. These are people who ride on the ambulances, and if something horrible happens, you know about the body, you know how to stabilize wounds, and I thought, let me take this class and just see where it goes, because then when I go out, I'll just feel more comfortable. So I take the class, and I love it. And just at the time I'm going to graduate, and this is only a few months, maybe it was a 6-month class or something, the hospital, the emergency room at Barnes Hospital in St. Louis, which is where the class was, calls up the school and says, we're looking for an emergency room technician, somebody who knows how to do everything that an EMT does, and have you had any recent people that you would recommend? And the guy in charge of the school said, I got just the guy for you. And the next thing I know, I'm working in an emergency room. And my heart was set on going out and traveling again, because the only reason I did this was to learn how to take care of emergencies. But I stayed in the emergency room for a little while, and I felt a deep kinship with the people working in the hospital, because when you go into a hospital, you are vulnerable. And I've seen this look on people's faces again and again and again, like, can you help me? And always the people who work in these hospitals, they step up and they take care. And over time, I realized it was time for me to hit the road again. And I left the hospital, but the experiences there always stayed with me. And there were some deep ones, because there would be gunshots on Saturday night, and all of a sudden I'm in the middle of it. And the years pass. I don't really think of it outside of it was a great experience, and I'm glad I know what I know. If somebody needs CPR, I know how to do that. Well, many years pass, and I transitioned from writing these stories, because when I came back from that 10 years around the world without a home, just traveling, that's when I transitioned to Esquire magazine and started interviewing the icons who've shaped the last 50 years. And the reason I was able to do it was because I basically treated the icons like I would the people that I was meeting on buses as I was traveling around the world. And it was a different kind of interview for them, and they warmed up to it. And it gets back to going straight to their heart and not making it a formal interview with a pad and questions. There were conversations. And so I do that for almost 20 years. And it led to me speaking on a cruise ship to a group of 4,000 entrepreneurs. And the idea was decoding the art of the interview, and the room was packed. I mean, it was the first time I was speaking, and never really having done it before. I rehearsed, and I had great stories from interviewing Muhammad Ali and Gorbachev and Donald Trump and Robert De Niro, and I got up to speak, and when I was done, I got a standing ovation. And so I was in a new place. And then I got on Tim Ferriss's podcast, and now 1 million people heard these stories, and they started calling me in to speak. And so now I was like a little business. And I start to speak for companies around the world, and it's great. It's taken me all over the place, and I'm then start a podcast, and now you're paying audio engineers, and now you're realizing, oh, I need to get my Twitter numbers up and get on LinkedIn, and I need somebody to help me do that. And so this is moving along, and in my mind, I still hadn't really got past the point of, well, if I go out there and I give a great speech and everybody loves it, well, then that's all I need to do. And that was a big mistake, because as you say, there's a whole other side of this. How do you make people aware of what you're doing? How do you, after you make that connection, to get them to like you and know you and like you and trust you? So then I had to figure out a way to start to do that. And along the way, a man who works at a hospital, who kind of specializes in finding people who are like really good at something before everybody else knows about it. And he heard me on Tim Ferriss's podcast, and he reached out to me and brought me into the hospital. And I'm in this hospital. Well, it wasn't actually in the hospital. I was asked to do a presentation for the hospital. But the beautiful thing about the presentation was they invited me in to listen for the whole day, or the morning before I spoke, so I can hear what was going on, how they were thinking. And a nurse got up and very casually said, she was the chief of nursing, that every day a nurse in this hospital holds a prematurely born infant in the palm of the hand. And she said it like so casually, and I'm thinking, what? Like, that's like amazing. And like 1 pound, 2 pounds. And I can't wrap my head around how does this come off as a daily occurrence that enables them to nurture the child's going to grow, and a few weeks or months later, leaves the hospital to live a normal life. And so later I sought out this nurse, and I said to her, do you tell stories about this? And she kind of looked at me as to say, like, we do this every day. This is normal. And I said, well, it may be normal to you, but this ain't normal to me. And so I reached out to the hospital again because I was fascinated with the stories that were there that probably weren't coming out. And then I started to notice all of the media coverage around healthcare, hospitals. It's largely negative. And like maybe that's a good thing, because the day that you have to look for something good that happened to print it in a newspaper, we're in trouble. But the bottom line is all this negativity is sort of being shot out there, and it's kind of the cloud that everyone in healthcare is living under. And yet, they're not looking deep into themselves, into their own hearts, and saying, like, this is what we're doing every day. These are the miracles that are happening every day. And so I was so grateful that this hospital allowed me to come back in and look for some of these stories. And they are not hard to find. But the one that hit me was about a doctor who worked at the hospital, and he had an uneven bite. So he's living kind of a charmed life. He's got 2 kids, 6 and 3. His wife's an anesthesiologist, and they're doing fine. And he always, one thing that he wanted to do is just correct this uneven bite. And so he looks into it, and he finds out that, well, I'll need braces for a year. Then I'm going to need my jaw broken in order to create the space to make this work perfectly. Then another year of braces. He says, okay, I'm willing to do that. There's very low possibility of anything bad happening out of this. And so he goes in and he gets the braces after a year, goes in for the jaw surgery, comes out with his mouth wired shut. For a little while, he's going to have to eat through a syringe, and he can't speak very well, but as soon as his jaw heals, they'll take the bands off, and he'll never snore again either. So he's really happy. And as he is leaving the hospital the day after the surgery, and the mother of somebody else who had gone into the hospital to have the same surgery sees him and says, like, wow, you look great, because my son had the same surgery and is swollen. And so this doctor's thinking, piece of cake. Well, he goes home and he's on painkillers, he's in bed, he's recuperating, and he starts to feel shortness of breath. First he thinks it's like nasal congestion, but then it keeps up. And his wife takes a look at him and says, maybe we should cut the bands off and see if that helps you. So they cut the bands off, and he said, oh, that's much better. Yeah. And she's an anesthesiologist. She looks at him and says, no, that's not better. We better call up 911. And so he goes into the hospital. Well, actually, before they can even pick him up, he stands up to put a shirt on, and man, boom, feels like Mike Tyson has just put his right fist through this doctor's chest. And the doctor immediately realizes pulmonary embolism, there's a blood clot, it's probably in my leg, and whatever's in there, gases, whatever, it's now headed through my lungs to my heart, and that's why I can't really breathe. And he's thinking, okay, I know how to deal with this. I'm going to get some oxygen. They'll give me a blood thinner. But when he gets picked up and brought into the emergency room, he's looking at the faces of all the people over him, and he knows, like, uh-oh, this is a lot deeper than I thought. And ultimately, the emergency room treated this with textbook care. And in this case, textbook care wasn't enough, because he actually lost his pulse. And for a minute and a half or so, he's basically dying. They're using compressions to get the blood circulating around his organs so his organs don't die. And if this hospital hadn't had this cutting-edge machine, only 1 in 100 hospitals have it, that serves as lungs and heart. Once you connect somebody to it, it will pump blood for you, it will breathe for you, and it enabled him to go 4 days while he was unconscious and didn't know anything that was happening to him. And then he woke up with just incredible gratitude, and they were able to repair him. And he's going to be going back to work soon. And point of the story is he got 200 thank you notes because he wanted to thank everybody who worked on him to give him his life. And he got to 200, and there were still more people to thank. And when we were talking about it, I asked him, well, did you thank the people in the department that was sterilizing the equipment that the surgeons used? And he said, I didn't even think of that. And ultimately, what I'm getting to here is that when I got up to speak, not many people in the hospital that I told this story to knew about the story, their own story. And so when you think about that, you're thinking of, here are all these people who basically created a miracle, and many others in the hospital who were in some way attached to the miracle. I mean, you could have been in the housekeeping department that kept the unit that he was in free from germs so that he didn't get sepsis. And you then are attached to that success, to that miracle. And yet people were just going in, doing their job day after day, thinking, well, this is normal, this is what I do. And so it made me realize that I need to help the hospitals find these stories and tell these stories for a bunch of reasons. Number one, internally, it aligns everybody and makes people understand, yeah, this is who we are here. This is what we do. And it acknowledges the work that they all do. And when you have that acknowledgement, people do better jobs. And we're living in a time of tremendous physician pressure. There are actually reports that every day in America a physician commits suicide. They're under tremendous pressure. And I think a lot of people in healthcare are under pressure, and it's magnified in the headlines. And yet, we often don't see the amazing things that they're all doing and that they need to be appreciated for, because when they're appreciated, they'll reach out even more with their hearts and in ways that touch the patients. And there's actually research that proves when patients get that kind of touch, they have better outcomes. So I made this crazy connection that all I have to do is what I've been doing all these years, finding these great stories and getting them out so that the hospitals can use them. And in some way, I'm going to actually be some small way, minuscule way, maybe like that housekeeper. I can be influencing the outcome of a patient. And now I'm an entrepreneur and I can do it.
I love it. Oh, wow. That's awesome. Okay, so tell me your plan. Have you thought through this process of you meet with the hospital, and how are you going to get these stories? Are you going to just be talking to doctors? What's your strategy here?
And this is, I'm just starting on this now. It's not hard at all. I went to a hospital in Colorado, and I'm just walking down the corridor with a doctor. And this corridor was in the cancer wing, and they had these amazing portraits of cancer survivors lining the walls. A great photographer had done them, and underneath, the photographer had figured out something really cool. photographer asks the patients for their favorite, like, life-changing quote or whatever was at the essence of their recovery. Like, give me that quote. And then photographer would put it underneath the photo. So you'd see the portrait of the person and then what got them through it. And I'm looking at this and I just know, okay, if you go into a hospital and you get diagnosed with something, like, what do you immediately do after that? You go on the internet where there are 50 million possibilities. You don't know what's right, but I read this here, I read this there. It's really confusing. And again, the doctors are under tremendous pressure. Their time is under tremendous pressure. Where are you going to get all the information that you need? And even when you're in the room with the doctor and you get hit with news that shakes you, are you really listening that well? No. Do you have somebody next to you who can be listening that well? And maybe somebody next to you has been knocked off balance. You have a little tape recorder that can make sure you're getting the information that you need, or are you just walking out there in a haze? And then I just started thinking, like, what if the stories of this hospital were recorded and put in, like, an archive, so that a patient 2 days after a diagnosis, they're feeling unsure, they can, like, sit down in a chair and watch people talking about what they're about to go through. It would be incredibly liberating having those stories, that information. And this is not to say that it's telling you what's going to happen to you, but you're going to have ideas of, this is what you're going to go through. This is going to be what the roller coaster's like. So when you get on the roller coaster, you know, okay, we're going down at 90 miles an hour now, but it's supposed to go back up, and I can get through it. And this is, every hospital can do this, and doctors can do it, and I can help. I know how to do this.
I think this is brilliant. I really do. And for multiple reasons. We've all Google doctored ourselves from little ailments. Everyone's always Googled something, and it's always terrible because...
Yeah, like you get a broken toenail and you're coming out with a life-threatening illness. Yeah.
But what's amazing to me is that at this point of your career, you can do anything. I mean, you've interviewed the greatest people of all time. And the fact that you're choosing to talk to the average survivor, cancer survivor, any kind of, person that had some bad diagnosis, and you're choosing to talk to that person. Tell us about that. Like,
here's, what happened when I spoke at this hospital after going in and getting their stories. I was trying to make a point that, yes, you can tell your stories. It's not hard. And guess what? Your stories are better than my stories. I mean, I have great stories with Mikhail Gorbachev and Muhammad Ali, but the things that happen in a hospital oftentimes revolve around what make a story great. Number one, you have a vulnerable character. As soon as somebody walks in the hospital, they're vulnerable. Number two, there are probably going to be obstacles along the way. And that's very much along the line of a movie. I mean, you can take everything I'm about to say, this little formula, and apply it to your favorite movie, and I guarantee you, it's the hero's journey. And so the vulnerable character is going through obstacles, doesn't know how they're going to make it. They need to make a transformation. And along the way, they meet a mentor. And this mentor has information or a gift that they can pass on. And that's what the hospital is. The hospital in that case is Mr. Miyagi, who needs to help the Karate Kid. And it doesn't always go immediately well. There are more obstacles. But now mentor and vulnerable character go through them. And hopefully at the end, you have a transformation. So it's not any different from your favorite movie. And I guarantee you, I can take anybody who works in any hospital out to a movie. Afterward, we'll walk out and I'll ask them what they thought. And if the story wasn't told well, they'll say, I didn't like this part, and, that kind of was messed up. Or if it did work, they'll say, oh, remember in Nemo when this happened? They'll recognize where and how a story works. And so I just know that hospitals have these great stories because miracles are happening every day in these places.
Absolutely.
And so it's just ripe for somebody to just go through, and if you're thinking of these stories like apples on a tree, just pick the apples. And it's not hard to find. All you have to do is just start talking with a nurse, or it's not even, it could be somebody, I say not even, what I'm getting at is you can talk to somebody who's in housekeeping and they will know a great story about what makes them proud to work in that hospital.
So if you're listening today and you work at a hospital or are connected with people in hospitals, start sharing those stories or start documenting those stories, and let Cal help you put those stories together.
Yeah, this is something that is going to make me feel good every day when I wake up for the rest of my life. Because if these stories get documented and then get used to help new patients coming in, or even when you think about this, if you're the hospital, when these stories come out and you see how many thank you notes it takes to thank the people who created a miracle, all by doing little things, those people feeling appreciated are going to do better work. It's going to be able for the hospital to, with those stories, to recruit, to onboard people, for retention. It just creates a great, beautiful flow of positive energy, which can be used by everybody. So it makes me really happy to have found this. And now I have to do what like deep in your bones, but which I never knew. I have to think about this like an entrepreneur and figure out how to reach out, which is why I was so excited to meet you, because I guess that's what I'm doing now. I'm reaching out.
Yeah, but now you have to figure out, okay, how are you going to scale this, right? Let's say 5 hospitals called you tomorrow and said, help me, Cal, help me tell these stories. You're going to have to figure out how to duplicate yourself and create systems and processes for lots of different hospitals to do this, because you're only one person. And that's another thing about entrepreneurship, is you could only do so much.
Right. So I think what's ultimately going to happen, and people have actually reached out to me and asked to become to have me as a mentor. I think what's ultimately going to happen is I'm going to have to bring in some young people who will follow me around, and maybe these are people who work in the hospitals, and so they can learn exactly how to do it and keep it going. These are things that I am going to have to figure out. But I know it's working because hospitals have called and then have called back. So I am going to throw myself into this, and taking upon what you just said, I'm going to, at the outset, I'm going to talk to them about who would be a good mentor or mentee in your hospital to follow this along. And then let's see where it goes. I'm just, as you pointed out, like I'm finding my way, but I know there are people who would look at this and say, okay, this is how you do it, Cal, A, B, C, D, E. And maybe I should talk to those people. But there's something about like going on the journey and finding your way yourself so that it's what works for you as opposed to a formula that works for somebody else.
Correct. I think that's amazing. I'm truly inspired myself right now to reach out to some of my connections, because I think that it's valuable. That method is valuable. But now, you have the shifting the gear to the entrepreneur and looking at this as something that you can pursue and mentor other people. I think that'll be a necessary next step, right?
Scaling.
Yes.
I got to learn scaling.
Yes.
Next. Who would have ever thunk? I mean, I just figured out how to set up the podcast equipment. And now I'm like looking into technology. So, okay, I have to look into scaling while at the same time making sure that I'm delivering the highest quality stories to the hospital, because that's what I got to hit a home run every time.
Right. And also finding the talent, right? Being able to identify, the hospital send you some young kid and say, okay, this is the guy. You have to also identify, is this person talented? Are they going to do things to my level of quality and service and all that, which is all good. I'm sure you'll be able to do that very easily. Just be able to.
That won't be hard.
Right.
I'll probably be able to look at that person. And, I heard a dentist tell me about how he hired. And he didn't do these long interviews with people. He would have, when he wanted to hire an assistant who was handing him the tools and doing the x-rays, and he would talk briefly with them and then basically have them do a day on the job. And he would know in that day, okay, is this person right or is it not right? And then when he hired them, they would last 25 years.
Because he knew when you know your craft, you could identify people that are good at their craft.
Exactly. And he's seeing how the assistant is interacting with the patient. He's seeing how quickly the assistant is doing what he needs to be done. And it struck me that's a pretty good way to hire, to just have somebody go through it with you, and then okay, because somebody can in an interview say one thing, but then when you got to deliver, it's another story. So I think I can figure that out. It's, what, if 20 hospitals call me tomorrow, then it's going to be a problem. But I think
it's a good problem to have.
All right. That's
awesome. Okay, so let's wrap up here and tell me, from all the people you've interviewed, who's made the biggest impact on you?
Well, probably Larry King, because I interviewed him for Esquire magazine. It was the Wisdom in His Own Words, the column that I wrote, What I've Learned. And after that, his literary agent was also mine, and he wanted to write a soup to nuts autobiography. And so the agent put us together, and I went out to Los Angeles to help him craft the book, and we would meet over breakfast. He had a table of his buddies, all from Brooklyn, or many from Brooklyn. Every day they would meet at the same restaurant, same time, and I got included in the group. And basically I was having breakfast with Larry like every day for 10 years. And some of the people at the table originally got strokes, passed on, because they were 75 when I arrived at the table. And most recently, and I think this has an impact on why I am going to do what I'm about to do with hospitals. He had some heart problems, actually more than heart problems, a lot of problems, medical problems. And in April, he went into the hospital, and he spent a few months in the hospital. And, I watched him go from laying in a hospital bed to now at home, and he's walking and basically going back to living the life that he had. And at points in those 4 months, it didn't look like that was going to happen. And I just watched how this hospital was so instrumental in getting him from the place where he was in a lot of trouble to now he's walking again. And all this stuff is happening at the same time. And so that's why it's just telling me, look, how many ticks on the clock do you have? What do you want to do with those ticks on the clock? And if I can help to care for the people who are caring for others, I know that those ticks are going to be used really wisely, because it's going to set a cycle in motion that's going to help a lot of people. So this is all coming in a very compressed time. The time that the hospitals were calling me in to speak, the time that Larry got ill, and my own thoughts that went back to my own days working in the emergency room. It's all happened in like the last 5-6 months. So it's completely new, but I just know this is the way the current has taken me. This is where I'm going, and I know I can do a lot of good things with it, so I'm off.
Wow. What an inspiration. Cal, thank you. You just moved me, really, because you're right. I mean, we have limited time here, and what are we going to do with our time? How are we going to make a difference, right? What are people going to remember us for? And I think that's so powerful, and I wish you a lot of luck in this new endeavor. I think it's going to be awesome.
Thank you for having me here. You did a tremendous job.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening today. For more information on how to grow your business, visit our website at 4dglobalinc.com. Click on the Owners Academy tab for more videos on sales, marketing, operations, and leadership. See you next time.